Once upon a time, the fate of a youth group football team relied on the wisdom and tactics of an autistic child with a social development delay and basically no sporting experience. The actions of this one boy were set to decide the result of the whole match and define the power balance of village football for years to come. Oh, and by the way, you may have worked out by my accent that I'm British, so the game I'm referring to is real football. You know, as opposed to hand egg. For any Americans that need a translation though, football is precisely the same game as soccer except with a different title. One used by those who invented the English language and therefore speak it correctly. Anyway, now that I've alienated a large proportion of my viewers, let's get back on topic. And before I tell you how this epic David versus Goliath underdog football match went, and whether this autistic child, who was me by the way, managed to save the day or not, some context. A decade or two after this story, I became a primary school teacher. It had been my career ambition ever since I was 14, and I worked incredibly hard to make it happen. It largely involved qualifying for a teaching course designed without autistic people in mind, passing a recruitment process designed without autistic people in mind, and teaching in an environment where the only way you could become an Ofsted accredited outstanding teacher was to think and act like a non-autistic person. After realising that I could cope with a primary teaching system if I sacrificed everything else in my life, but I wouldn't be able to do it until retirement, not without the job dragging my soul out of my body, drowning it in glitter and tearing it to shreds with those tiny scissors that can barely cut card, I decided to prioritise myself and I left teaching forever. For the first time anyway. A few years later, I re-entered teaching by going into autism-specific education, which looking back probably should have been my ambition all along. And surprise, surprise, I was a much better teacher in autism-specific education than I ever could have been in mainstream primary. The obvious assumption is that this must have been because I was autistic, and yes, that played a huge part in it. There are also lots of other factors, but they're best saved for another video. The factor most relevant to this story is the fact that I was trusted to use my own teaching methods, and the school were fine with me teaching as my authentic self as long as my students could access the learning. Now I've left teaching forever for a second time to focus on full-time autism advocacy. Part of my work for Autistic Not Weird is training staff teams about how to meet the needs of autistic students or clients. One of the very first things I tell teachers is, your autistic students may need their own methods in order to succeed. You see, it wasn't just me who benefited from approaching things in my own individual way. My neurodivergent students did too. Looking back, I've always used my own individual methods. And this brings me back to the football game. So I was in a youth group called the Boys Brigade. For those who haven't heard of the Boys Brigade, we're a Christian youth organisation who do actually provide for girls as well, it's complicated, who have the honour of being the oldest youth organisation in the world. We even invented the Scouts. Well, helps their founder to found them anyway. Sadly, they've since grown much, much bigger than us, and there is some level of rivalry between the two groups, as you'd imagine. Anyway, when I was 8 years old, our Boys Brigade company had a football match against the Scouts. So already, tensions were quite high. And the thing is, our team really wasn't that good. There seemed to be this tradition in my village that all the sporty kids joined the Scouts, and all the geeky kids joined the Boys Brigade. So in short, we were going to get slaughtered. And I asked if I could be in goal. I had never been in goal before, but it looked very interesting, and I was curious. So we lined up. The game started. The crowd held their breath and awaited the inevitable. And it turns out, I was actually really good. The first clue was when one of the Scouts got to me in the opening minutes, and I tackled the ball out from under him and booted it to the other end of the field. Didn't even need my hands. The threat was over. It didn't take long for the attackers to be back. One of them dribbled around our useless defenders, got to me again, and got the ball out from under him and booted it to the other end of the field. By all rights, we should have been 2-0 down. Instead, it was 0-0. That's English for nobody having scored yet. But I knew all along that we weren't going to score any goals. We weren't that kind of team. But there was a glimmer of hope as I tackled the ball a third time and booted it to the other end of the field, that maybe we could hang on for a draw. And obviously, I was ignoring all the adults on the sideline shouting, "Christopher!" I was Christopher back then. "You're supposed to bend down and pick up the ball! That's how goalkeeping is supposed to work!" I let their voices go right over my head as I tackled the ball and booted it to the other end of the field. There were a few minutes to go, and incredibly, it was still 0-0. It was an enormous plot twist. The Scouts were staggering around with wounds in their pride. The village had come to a standstill. Newspaper headlines were being rewritten at that moment. And that was exactly when a local hero stepped in to save the day. That's right, a grown-up who knew better. And that person told me, in no uncertain terms, "Christopher, you are going to lose this game unless you change your approach and do what goalkeepers are supposed to do. You must reach with your arms down to the grass and clasp your hands around the ball, tucking it tightly to your chest as if it were your firstborn child. I know this to be the way, because I am the adult, therefore I automatically know better." Because all adults always know what they're doing, of course, and are definitely not just faking it most of the time. And my generation definitely isn't going to crash the economy before you grow up and stop you from buying a house like I did. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the point was clear. So, inspired by words from higher authority, I spent the last few minutes bending down to pick up the ball, and we lost 4-0. Yeah. Guess who got the blame? Now, I'd like to think that the moral of that story is pretty obvious. You probably saw the title of this video, How Not to Play Football, and assumed it was about my own ideas and how terrible they were. But honestly, the only way to not play football is any way that does not correlate with the way your body works, specifically your feet and your brain. So a few decades on, I spent my days stood in front of classes of autistic teenagers in a school that was so much more flexible than mainstream education had ever been. And I took great pride in standing in front of them in my maths lessons and announcing, there are at least half a dozen methods to getting the answer to this question right. Within reason, I don't care which method you use. Your brain, your decision. Of course, I had to include the words within reason, as I was stood in front of some very literal-minded people who love taking the mick. With that said, at least nobody booted their work to the other end of the class. And now that I've left teaching forever, again, this is what I tell staff during my teacher training and my conference keynotes. That maybe if people think differently, maybe we should let them do things differently, in ways that make sense to their brains, rather than all the non-autistic brains watching on, who want them to access the world in the correct way, rather than a way that makes sense to them. Because let's be honest, when it comes to independent problem solving, your brain is the only brain your methods need to make sense to. So do what works for you. So that's it for this truly awful animation, and I hope you found it useful. And as a tribute to my former students, who all told me how much they'd cringe if I ever used this phrase in one of my videos, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. There you go, kids. Enjoy the cringe.